Today, Hillary Clinton reflected on the early days of her career when she found herself on the congressional staff working on the impeachment of Republican President Richard Nixon in 1974.
I was one of the young lawyers who actually drafted the memo about what is a high crime and misdemeanor. And it was truly meant by our founders to describe actions that undermined the integrity of our government, that placed the personal or political interests of a president over the interests of the nation.
She was one of the young lawyers who drafted that memo. The other young lawyer working on that memo about high crimes and misdemeanors was a Republican, William Weld, who is now the only Republican candidate for president running against Donald Trump. Those two young lawyers both had big futures in politics in their parties. Bill Weld became the two-term Republican governor of Massachusetts after serving as the U.S. attorney in Boston, appointed by President Ronald Reagan. And after that, Bill Weld was promoted by President Reagan to become the head of the criminal division of the Justice Department. Bill Weld grew up in the era of principled Republicans and principled Democrats, along with corrupt Republicans and corrupt Democrats. And what the impeachment investigation of President Richard Nixon showed is there can come a time in politics when you have to stand on principle over party. We showed you that last night when the only Republican member of the House Judiciary Committee who voted for all three articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon announced his vote on impeachment.
Now, I'm a Republican. Party loyalty and personal affection and precedents of the past must fall, I think, before the arbiter of men's action, the law itself. No man, not even the President of the United States, is above the law.
If you're a high school student in America tonight, you have never seen anyone like Larry Hogan in the Congress. You've never seen that. You've never seen a principled Republican in Congress take a stand against a Republican president. But the principled Republican used to not be so rare, and Massachusetts produced more than its share of principled Republicans. Elliot Richardson was elected lieutenant governor of Massachusetts in the 1960s and then attorney general of Massachusetts before he joined the Nixon administration, serving in 2 cabinet positions, including Secretary of Defense, before becoming attorney general during the investigations of President Nixon. When, on a Saturday night, President Nixon ordered Elliot Richardson to fire Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, Elliot Richardson refused and resigned in protest. And in that moment of standing on principle against the President of the United States, Elliot Richardson became the model of integrity for every attorney general who has followed him, some of whom have clearly not lived up to the Richardson standard. One of those was Ronald Reagan's Attorney General Edwin Meese, who was accused of using his public office to enrich his friends. Bill Weld resigned from the Reagan Justice Department in protest of the Republican Attorney General's conduct.
Indications this morning that the legal problems surrounding Attorney General Edwin Meese may force more defections from the Justice Department. The department was rocked Tuesday by the resignation of Deputy Attorney General Arnold Burns, and he was followed out the door by William Weld, head of the criminal division. Both called it quits after they were unable to persuade the White House to dump Meese on grounds that his legal troubles are hurting the department. Officials say Meese was stunned and was hardly able to speak when told of the resignations.
Bill Weld then testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee against the Attorney General.
The question is whether Mr. Meese is taking official actions that he knows are going to redound to the financial benefit of his friend, and I suggest that he did so.
Shortly after Bill Weld's testimony, Attorney General Ed Meese resigned. Those were the days when corrupt Republicans had to deal with principled Republicans. Joining us now is Bill Weld, former Republican governor of Massachusetts and candidate for president of the United States. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
I want to lean on your experience as a federal prosecutor, as a Justice Department official, to get your reading of the Mueller report.
I've been thinking a lot about 1974 recently. In the train coming down from Boston to New York yesterday, I read Bill Barr, AG Barr's 19-page report about how really you can't ever accuse a sitting president of anything in the criminal realm. And you know, Bill Barr is a very distinguished lawyer and a very good guy. I've known him for a long time. But it lay in my mind that he apparently never read United States versus Nixon, the July of 1974 case, unanimous, including 3 Nixon appointees that said the president is not above the law. And that led to Article 3 of impeachment against President Nixon, contempt of Congress for contumaciously refusing to comply with lawful subpoenas, you know, which we have going down today. So history is repeating itself, and I think the same errors are being made again. I think the Mueller report gives us kind of a window into Mr. Trump's mind, if not his soul. And I think things are moving from narcissism to megalomania. You know, only I exist. This, of course, is what narcissists, and particularly malignant narcissists who like to see other people lose, think in their heart of hearts. And I fear that Mr. Trump does have designs on becoming what the founders and the writers of the Constitution most feared, and that's a tyrant in our country.
If this was the young Bill Weld on the staff of the House Judiciary Committee right now, on the Republican staff, would you be talking about impeachment proceedings?
I'm not so sure about impeachment. I say that not for legal reasons, but for political reasons. I actually think, contrary to what others do, that those boyos over at the White House are dying to have impeachment proceedings initiated so that Mr. Trump can scream like a stuck pig for the next year and a half and not really have to engage on anything. He'll just say witch hunt, you know, overreaching, and it does seem unlikely, although I probably know half a dozen Republicans in the Senate who might, you know, be persuaded to do the right thing if the evidence is as strong as Mueller's report suggests. But you know, it's probably not going to be enough. And then you're going into the election with the Senate having refused to convict and remove the president. And it's going to give him just a delicious talking point for the last few months before the election. I think the most important thing is that everybody behave themselves so that we don't have 6 more years of you know, let's everybody lie. Let's not just circle the wagons, but everyone has to lie. Oh, you mean you can't lie because that's not true? What's your point? This is a man whose first reaction is to lie about everything. Say what you want about President Nixon. He had the self-awareness to recognize that he had done wrong, and he resigned. And, you know, I'm not sure that Mr. Trump has that self-awareness. Thank you very much.
And Richard Nixon was a trained lawyer, and it seems like there were several points in the investigation where Nixon, the lawyer, understood that there was no legal alternative in the next move, that he must, in fact, submit to the Supreme Court.
Well, he certainly understood it after the 9-0 Supreme Court case, because those tapes were turned over instantly, and he had to know that they were his undoing. They had him, you know, lying on television to the American people, and that was enough to remove Mr. Nixon. Everyone said, oh, that's one thing you can't do, is lie to the American people. It happens in this administration almost every day, sometimes on little things, sometimes on very big things.
The point you were making, that one of the articles of impeachment was specifically about what the president is doing today,
right,
which is refusing to comply with legal and legitimate subpoenas that are investigating criminal conduct.
That's right.
When they are investigating the Mueller report, they are investigating suggestions and evidence of criminal conduct in the Mueller report.
No, that's exactly right. And what Mrs. Clinton said yesterday, she was Miss Rodham when I knew her then, and we did work on that memorandum together, but was absolutely right about the grounds for removal. And I think it was she who came up with the theory based on the failure to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. The president takes an oath to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Well, I mean, this president mocks the rule of law. So it couldn't be clearer. Volume 2 of the Mueller report could not be clearer about criminality.
Could you stay with us across a break? We squeeze in a commercial here. We're going to be right back with former Governor Bill Weld. As of tonight, Bill Weld is the only Republican running against Donald Trump in the Republican primaries. Will former Ohio Governor John Kasich be next?
You got to recall, I never supported the guy. I never endorsed him. I didn't vote for him. I didn't go to the convention. And a lot of people wondered why. Well, it's right in front of you. You know, if you don't want to read the whole report, just read parts of the report. The kinds of things that were happening in there. I'm not only disappointed and angry, I'm sickened by all this, because this is not the kind of performance or the kind of behavior that I saw from so many of the presidents I've either observed or have known.
We're back with former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, who is running for the Republican presidential nomination against Donald Trump. How does it feel like to be the only one, and how long do you think you're going to be the only one in this field?
You know, I don't know. I spoke with both John Kasich and Larry Hogan before declaring last week and invited them both in, and they both said, we applaud what you're doing. We're all on the same team. Let's see what, you know, the fall brings. I think they're not going to get in unless things change, whereas I'm very happy to get in right now and to try and make things change by enlarging the electorate, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's what Eugene McCarthy did in 1968 when he got in against Lyndon Johnson on the Democratic side. He had no expectation of winning. He only said he was going to run in 4 primaries. He ended up running in more. But then he showed there was incredible vulnerability for Lyndon Johnson. Bobby Kennedy jumped in. So is that something that you envision possible here, especially in New Hampshire?
I intend to run a national primary, except for parts of the Deep South where it really wouldn't make a lot of sense for me. But I'll start in the 6 New England states, led by New Hampshire, then go to the Mid-Atlantic states, where I'm a native and I spend a lot of time. Then this next month in May, I'm going to go out to California, probably Oregon, Washington. California is Mr. Trump's worst state. They don't get along on anything. That's a lot of electoral votes. I will strenuously contest New York and Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
In the modern history of the presidency, any challenger of a president, an incumbent president, re-election in the primaries, who stayed in after New Hampshire, did not win the nomination. But that president did not win re-election after being damaged in the primary.
In all 5 cases, the president did lose the general election.
Yeah.
None of the challengers won.
Right.
But in all 5 cases, except maybe Nixon, who was challenged by Pete McCloskey, as you pointed out.
Speaking of Nixon, President Nixon eventually, as we talked in the last segment, about his as a lawyer and his understanding of the law and his understanding eventually of the inevitable power of it, he chose to resign just when the articles of impeachment were voted on. He didn't wait around for the House of Representatives to vote. He didn't wait around for a trial in the Senate. What about this president of the United States? Should he, for the good of the Republican Party, if he could ever think that way, resign the presidency?
Forget the good of the Republican Party, for the good of the country. If he had the self-awareness that Richard Nixon had, sense of shame is too strong a word, but self-awareness is probably too soft a word, he would resign. We would be better. The truth is, we would be much better off with the President Mike Pence than a President Donald Trump.
And what about the Republican Party? What do you make of the difference between the Republican Party you worked with during the impeachment of Richard Nixon and where this congressional Republican Party is now?
Yeah, when I worked in the House, when I worked in the Senate, lions still strode the earth. People listened to each other. It was a different day. The last 15 years have been totally different and poisonous, and as everybody knows, the 2-party system in Washington has gone into a death spiral embrace, and no one's really interested in working together on anything. I'll tell you, if I get in there, I'm going to have a bipartisan cabinet, and on day 1, just as I did as governor, reach right across that aisle.
And you wouldn't be the first one to have a bipartisan cabinet, because that's the way it often used to be.
For sure.
Bill Weld, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. We really appreciate it.